our 3070 template that we've used for other community-based projects. It's different in that this is an alteration as opposed to a new construction, but I think it is the right way to go, and I think that's what we should do.
Anyone else? Anyone else? Councillor Stewart? Yeah, I think I wouldn't add anything to what Councillor Mitchell said. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. There you go, John. You can report back. And then we will go to public meetings and drainage meetings. Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Stewart, that the council meeting be adjourned at 9:38 a.m. for the purposes of holding a public meeting pursuant to the provisions of the Planning Act. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And first one up is minor variance application, excuse me, AO2-23, submitted by Harvey Walters. And Spencer, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning to council, staff, and members of the public joining us here this morning. The first application before the Committee of Adjustment is an application for minor variance submitted by Harvey Walters. It affects property at 49 Mindler Road in Thamesford. And in this instance, the applicant is seeking relief from two areas of the zoning bylaw. One which should allow them an increase in the gross floor area permitted for accessory structures, and the other which would allow for an increase in the height permitted to accessory structures. Council will note in the report the size of the structure being proposed is 1,600 square feet. However, the cumulative size of all accessory structures on the property would total just over 2,300 square feet. And that's given there's an existing approximately 700 square foot pool shed on the property. I would note that the property is rather large compared to many of the properties in this area of Thamesford, at just under half an acre in size. However, staff are not recommending approval of the application here today, in that we do feel it's excessive as far as the height requested at 6 meters as opposed to 4 meters. And further, the gross floor area from a cumulative standpoint at over 2,300 square meters as opposed to the 1076, which the zoning bylaw permits, is beyond what we would consider minor in nature. I would note Harvey Walters is here to speak to the application today should the committee have any questions of him, and I'm also available to do the same.
Thanks, Spencer. Questions for Spencer on the report? Not seeing any. Is the applicant here? Do they wish to speak to their application? If you can go over there and just, Spencer, can you just make sure that microphone's working for him?
Stand. Thank you. There is a slight change to the report. The pool shed, by mistake, someone interpreted it's only 600 square feet. The size of the property, I know there was concerns about the size of the building and coverage of the land. Our lot is 91 by roughly 260 feet. So that's 23,478 square feet. With the two buildings, the proposed shed, or the pool, shop and the pool shed, that would come to like 2,200 square feet. So we're well within or under the 10% factor, but the green space, the part that I and myself, my grandkids can enjoy or whatever, is probably 2/3 of that, and that's my rough figuring comes out to around 63%, or 15,000 square feet. So that alone puts it more usable space. The properties around the area on Miller Road, most of them are of 160-foot depth. As you can see up there on the diagram, where the side yard where the dash goes into the pool on your it's on my right up here. That is the neighbor's yard at 45. His lot is 160 feet deep. So I have another 100 feet that extends back to the, well, it was the Catholic School Board, but it's now the Truth Church. All those from that arrow to the back fence and all along that back fence from, which includes 53, 49, and 37. The school at the time planted a row of cedar trees on there. So there's, and they're well over 30, 35. Some of them are 40 feet. So that is a whole enclosed area. And where we've proposed the shop would be basically enclosed. There would be no visual effect from any of the neighbors, 53 or 37. 37 has a shop or a shed there, and the trees are blocking pretty well the whole view. 53, their backyard, they have a garden back there, but it wouldn't obstruct anything from them as well. The house itself, the existing house is, the height of the roof is probably 19 feet. So if you're viewing it from the street level, from the street back to the proposed shop would be like 200 feet. So it would kind of shadow the existing or the proposed shop. So the size-wise, you know, the impending, what the bylaw is saying about the height restriction and the square footage, that's why we're asking for the variance. The only other thing other than that would be, you know, there's all of that area around the pool, and I excluded the pool area as part of that 1,500 square feet, or 15,000 square feet, pardon me. So that is basically a more enjoyable space for the family to enjoy. So the actual building or secondary buildings would only amount to like 9% of the whole lot that would be covered. So that's, that was pretty well lit. Now, I took a drive around the village, and I did find properties that I think would be more reclusive and effective as far as neighbors being able to visually look from east to west, north to south. In fact, there was one at 18 Conway Court, biggest eyesore if anyone's from Thamesford, and was 123 and 127, the Red Barn on Stanley Street. Those people don't enjoy the full view if they went into their backyard. Then there's other ones at 141 Washington, 146, 200, 128, and 119 Delator that are all the same. They have large, they're a double car garage. Some have a loft and then a large peak. So they would all fall into the, I would presume, having to have a variance for height and being in shorter and smaller lots that would infringe more on the green space as well. But I think from what we proposed, the building where it's proposed to be situated is far enough back from the street. There's no development in behind. It's a school or a church property. And all the neighbors have, we've spoken to them personally, and they've all have no objections. And we keep the property well maintained. It's landscaped well. It's not going to be like an eyesore type thing. we do have large trees back there that will help to cover it, so that's basically all I have to say.
Thanks. Any questions from council for the applicant? Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, Harvey, the one question I had was pertaining to the height. You know, what I'm struggling with on the, I see your case when it comes to the land size itself, because you do have a fairly large lot as compared to a lot of the other ones in town. But with the height, what, and I'm not, you don't have to go into detail as to what the intended use of that is, but it seems excessive for what someone may need. So I'm just trying to understand that a little bit more, and that's what really jumps out to me as the downside to this minor variance.
My son's shop where he is now, like, we're going to be kind of amalgamating families. Where he is now, he has, toys like all the boys do and stuff like that. And, what he wants to be able to incorporate is like a storage lift hoist, where you could put a vehicle or, he's got what they call a side-by-side. You put it on, raise it up, it can be stored and drive under it. Well, you're looking at probably 12 feet for a hoist, and then with lighting above it and stuff like that. So you're going to be into the, 15, 16 foot range as far as the ceiling height. So that was the reason for for asking for that height. Now, finding out about this meeting late yesterday, I didn't really have a whole lot of chance to delve deeper into things, but we are looking at possibly doing a change on the roof struts, where they will go help lower the overall height, but still give us the ability to have some of the maximum heights we're looking for. I don't have them figures for you or be able to tell you right in a moment, but if that was the only factor, that's something that we're looking at. We probably wouldn't be able to get down to, I'm guessing, not guessing, but what was in the report of 16 feet. That might not be attainable, but it would be less than the 19 and a half or something that was on the application.
Any other questions for the applicant? You said you only found out about the meeting yesterday?
Yes.
You didn't get notification before yesterday about the meeting?
No. I called in and said that I would be attending the meeting. And then I got a call from Spencer saying about, he gave me the information about the report, so I found out read the report yesterday afternoon.
Okay.
You did pick up your yellow sign, correct?
Yes.
For your lawn?
Yeah.
And that had the meeting details on it?
I had the meeting details on it, but didn't have the report. Like I didn't know there was a report coming out
Oh, okay.
prior.
Okay.
So
Thanks
that
for clarifying.
That kind of caught me by surprise.
All right. And you're saying that you're trying to change the design of the building so you can lower the overall height?
Well,
But
that
different,
was-
sorry, to clarify, to something different than what's in the report?
since I've read the report, that was, it's one of the options that we've kind of come up with. If that was their only concern about the overall height, that was an option that was just kind of a spur of the moment. I haven't got any more details than that about it.
Okay. And is there anybody here from the public who wishes to speak to this application? Not seeing any, then, Councillor Stewart.
Just procedural. Is it approve, not approve, or is there a defer option so that the applicant has more time to look into it, or is that?
Council always has the option to defer its decision. I would suggest, it's up to you, but I would suggest that if we're going to defer it, we defer it for some kind of specific reason. Otherwise, theoretically, you could end up back here in another 2 weeks with all the same information in front of you again. So I think if there's specific concerns, I think it's important that we articulate them, whether you do it in the motion or not. just so that there's clarity to staff and applicants and any members of the public as to what the reason that it's being deferred and what we are thinking we might get back differently. But again, it would be up to council what motion they want to move, second, and vote on.
And if it were not approved, would that application, could he use the same application to reapply with different details, different sizes?
No.
Nothing?
If it was not approved, it would have to be a new application going forward. If it's deferred, it could continue under the same application with changes, whatever changes they may or may not be.
If I
Well,
could-
sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, if I could add one thing, I would invite the building department or the planning department to come out and observe the property, the pictures that are on the report, an aerial view and just a drawing doesn't do any justice to the maturity of the neighborhood. And if they were able to see the area that were proposed, then it would probably make it more clear to them that where the proposed building would be is going to be basically hidden back in the corner type thing. And
I don't have a motion in front of me, so you guys want to Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Stewart, that the Township of Zorra Committee of Adjustment not approve application AO2-23 submitted by Harvey Walters for lands described as Lot 17, M Plan 26, and municipally known as 49 Midler Road, Thamesford, in the Township of Zorra, as it relates to 1, relief from Section 5.1, Table 5.1.1.3, regulations for accessory uses. I, to increase the maximum permitted height for an accessory structure from 4 meters, 13.1 feet, to 6 meters, 19.68 feet. II, to increase the maximum permitted gross floor area of an accessory structure from 100 square meters, 1,076 square feet, to 213.6 square meters, 2,300 square feet, to facilitate the construction of a structure accessory to a residential use on a property zoned residential type 1, zone R1 in the Township of Zorra. Councillor Mitchell is the mover. Do you wish to speak to that?
So I'm going to support the recommendation from our planning staff, which was backed up by our chief building official, that we not approve this for three main reasons. First of all, as pointed out, is not a minor variance. What's requested in area is more than double what is allowed. The second one, I think there's potential negative impact on the neighbors, not only from the size of the structure, but also for the potential activity that will happen in this building. The inclusion of a hoist was a bit of a red flag for me when I read the report, and indicate that there would be a fair bit of work going on in this building on automobiles, even if it is only for their own personal equipment. And the third reason was that we would be setting a precedent for lots in a serviced area that I don't think we should set. In the past, I've been much in favor of oversized buildings of this type being built in agricultural areas and rural residential, where there's little impact on the neighborhood, but I don't think that this type of building should be built within Thamesford. I don't think we should defer this because there's a couple of issues here. And by not approving this at this time doesn't prevent the applicant from changing his plans to become closer into compliance and come back at a future time with a different plan. So I think that at this point we should not approve this application.
Councillor Stewart?
Yeah, I'll just add that I think while some valid points or arguments were brought up by the applicant, it's it's not minor in nature, the application, and that's the bottom line here. The one thing I will note is, you know, things may change down the road. Everyone currently may be happy with what may be proposed here as in terms of neighbors. There's a giant green space to the west that is underutilized at the moment as part of a property that's, you know, privately owned. I realize that, but you know, that could be a different, a very looking different situation in 10 years, 20 years from now, as we try to infill rather than expand our villages. So that could potentially cause issues down the road as well, and it isn't just about today that I'm looking at that.
Yeah, I'll support the motion as well to not approve the application. I think this is a classic, like textbook case of applying our zoning bylaw. The variances are not minor. If it was the height alone, maybe, but the size and the floor area is certainly not minor. And my understanding is there's not much scope there to reduce that. I think that it is not type of desirable development for a serviced village with, you know, neighbors, existing residential properties right now that are owned by certain people right now who may or may not be okay with it, but in the future those properties may be owned by very different people. The intention of our zoning bylaw is not just the future property owners and future property and current property owners and property uses, but potential future property owners and property uses. So I think that this is not in keeping with the general intent and purpose of the township zoning bylaw. So I'll be supporting the motion to not approve the application. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Sorry.
Can I have it deferred?
Not now.
What about when I said about the other buildings that I've mentioned on these streets that are, I figure, precedent setting as far as heights and stuff like that and covering the green space?
So any council is not bound by previous decisions of previous councils. So there is an idea of precedent and that, but it is really like it's a small p idea of precedent. It's up to the council of the day how much weight they want to put to that. And in fact, that's why we have elections every 4 years, so that residents can choose that they may disagree with past decisions and want to choose a new council to make different decisions.
Some of these were just recently built, so it's not, I think it was during this council.
Yeah, and it's absolutely up to council to make a decision at one meeting and make a different decision for different reasons at a future meeting, notwithstanding that residents may or may not agree with it. That's council's job.
Do you have any recommendations as far as size-wise that you would like to see?
I think I can't really speak to that right now because council's made its decision on it, but I would encourage you, if you still want to proceed with some type of building, I would encourage you to reach out to planning and the chief building official and talk to them about what, you know, what the zoning bylaw does and doesn't permit. But this council today said it had no appetite for variances as large as this.
That's why I applied for the variance, because we already went through that. You know,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
All right. And then, so now we are going on to 6B, zoning application ZN 5-23-03, submitted by Howe Farm. Spencer, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of things to highlight with this report in particular. This is a report for zone change, which is coming as the result of a recent farm consolidation. The associated application for consent was approved by Land Division Committee at the end of January. In this instance, the one report highlight I would note is the RR lot would be going into an RR special, and that's to recognize the reduced frontage on the property. Otherwise, everything proposed for the RR lot is in keeping with the zoning bylaw, and planning staff are supportive of the application today. I would note that Tim Hanlon is here, as well as Paula Hanlon, if there are any questions for them today. Thank you.
Thanks, Spencer. Questions for the planner on the report? Councillor Mitchell.
Spencer, I have a math question for you. Under the site assessment factors, it says surrounding agricultural land plus 10 and surplus farm dwelling minus 2, but the total is plus 10. And shouldn't it be 8? It used to be. Or is that new math?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it should be plus 10, but the minus 2, that typically is if there's a surplus farm dwelling on both properties, the subject lands and the adjacent property it's being merged with. The minus 2 should not be in place, so it's not a math problem, it's just that minus 2 should not be in the report.
Okay, that solves my curiosity on that one, thank you.
Any other questions for Spencer on the report? Is the applicant here, and do they wish to speak to their application? No. Are there any, I guess there's no questions for the applicant. Is there anybody here from the public who wishes to speak to the application? All right. So we are, just procedurally for everybody who understands, we're going to hear the next application, and then council will come out of the public meeting, make its decision on both zone changes. So you're not going to hear a decision right now before we move on to the next one. But last chance for council before we come out of the public meeting, not that it can't be debated when the motion's on the floor, but just before we come out of the public meeting, you're good? Okay. So then, Spencer, I'll move on to 6C, zoning application ZN 5-23-07, submitted by Donald McKay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The application before council at this time, application for a zone change, is to permit an additional residential unit, one of the first ones that we'll have in the township here. And in this instance, the applicants, I do want to note that it should be Aaron McKay rather than Eric on the report. So it's Aaron McKay and Louis Athanasakis. Louis is in attendance today, should council have questions of him. The application itself, this is an RR lot which was recently created by way of farm consolidation. And in this instance, the applicant is seeking to construct a larger dwelling than the principal dwelling on the farm. So in this instance, council would have the opportunity to say that should they wish to approve this, they can recognize the existing dwelling as the accessory residential unit, given that it is within the ARU criteria, save and except it would limit it to 1,000 square feet. This is 11 and change, 1140 square feet. And also, you'll have noticed in the report, there was mention of the fact that the existing dwelling would technically be considered to be in the front yard of the property, and ARUs typically are not permitted in the front yard. So within the report, those things were justified. If council had any questions regarding either, I'd be happy to address them. And just while this plate is on the screen before council, you'll notice the footprint of the previous bank barn there in brown. That bank barn has since been removed, and that, generally speaking, will form the footprint of the proposed new dwelling, which is approximately 2,000 square feet in size. And just for council's information, the applicant does require a larger dwelling in that he and his wife do have 5 children. So it is proposed that the 2,000 square foot house would accommodate he and his family, and the owner would remain in what would be considered the ARU at just over 1,100 square feet. We are supportive of the application here today. We think this, generally speaking, meets the intent behind the ARU policies and provisions which were recently approved and implemented. And I am happy to answer any questions council may have, as well as I'm sure Louis would be happy to do the same.
Thanks, Spencer. Questions from council for the planner on the report? Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, Spencer, just more going forward on a procedural thing, if these are seen as like the reestablishment of which is the ARU, which is the primary dwelling or principal dwelling, location of the ARU versus, how do you see those being, are these going to be submitted as minor variances moving forward from that standpoint, or is it sort of a case-by-case assessment when it comes to this type of thing?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Stewart's question. Typically, moving forward, I do anticipate we would see minor variance applications to address items such as size and proposed location. In this instance, it works out well because the property was recently done through farm consolidation, and there's a zone change in that the timing this was submitted was prior to the ARU provisions being in place at the township level. However, also, council does have the latitude to make the decision as to whether or not they feel it's appropriate to determine the original house as the ARU. The policies approved by county council are silent on that particular piece. But generally speaking, from a planning standpoint, I think the idea should be, is one of the dwellings clearly the accessory dwelling. So in this instance, it's, just over half the size of the proposed new dwelling. The new dwelling will function as the primary dwelling. And we do feel that it's appropriate and meets the intent behind both the policy and the zoning provisions to allow this type of scenario. Further to your question, Councillor Stewart, I do think we may see minor variance applications. However, in lots such as this, where you're in an RR or an RE setting, the provisions rather in the zoning bylaw are somewhat more permissive. So with respect to distance, there's not necessarily the same criteria for distance and other things as you might have if you're in a settlement area. So we do have a little bit more flexibility when it comes to these lots that are outside of service settlement areas.
Any other questions for the planner? Does the applicant wish to speak to their application? Are there any members of the public here who wish to speak to the application? All right, then I have moved by Mitchell, seconded by Stewart, that pursuant to the Planning Act, the public meeting be adjourned at 10:08 a.m. and the regular meeting of council be called back to order. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And then I have, with respect to, just going to double check and make sure I'm getting this right. Yeah. With respect to zoning application ZN 5-23-03, moved by Mitchell, seconded by Stewart, that the Council of the Township of Zorra approve the zone change application submitted by Howe Farms Ontario Limited and Cheryl and Gord Howe, whereby the lands described as Part Lot 9, Concession 1, Registered Plan Number 41R 8784, Township of Zorra, are to be rezoned from General Agricultural Zone A2 to Special Rural Residential Zone RR-29. Councillor Mitchell, as the mover, do you wish to speak to that?
Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. It's been approved by Land Division. It all has to do with farm consolidation. The only area of concern is the much narrower frontage, but if you look at the map, the residential property is set it back from the road a fair distance, and I believe the frontage is actually the laneway leading back into the footprint of the residential area. If we were to require the full frontage, that would actually make the footprint larger than the 2-acre limit that applies to this, and would take agricultural land out of production. So I have no problem with that change to what's required as far as frontage, and I have no problem supporting this application.
Councillor Stewart? Yeah, same. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. So that is approved. You're good to go. And then with respect to zoning applications ZN 5-23-07, moved by Mitchell, seconded by Stewart, that the Council of the Township of Zorra approve the zone change application submitted by Aaron McKay and Louis Athanaskas, whereby the lands described as West Part Lot 14, Concession 7, Township of Zorra, will be zoned to permit the development of a single detached dwelling, and that it is recognized that an existing single detached dwelling, 106 square meters, 1,140 square feet, will serve as an additional residential unit on the subject property. Councillor Mitchell, as the mover, do you wish to speak to that?
As Spencer alluded to, I think this is the first ARU approval that we've come through with the new rules. And previous council actually on at least a half a dozen occasions supported this type of development when we at that point had to go against the recommendation of staffing, because under the old rules it wasn't allowed. So we've had a history of supporting secondary dwellings on rural and rural residential properties when appropriate. I'm also pleased to see, and Spencer alluded to it, the flexibility of designating the existing building as the ARU and the new building as the primary residence where it's appropriate to do so. The house there is quite small, so to build a smaller house to put a family of 7 in would not be practical. So I'm glad that that flexibility has been built into the new ruling and has been recognized by planning staff. So quite happy to support this application. It's the first of many, I'm sure, that we'll have in this term.
Councillor Stewart? Yeah, I think this is, happy to see this application, to be honest, and I think that this is the, in my opinion, the correct interpretation of the intent of the ARU policies, right? It's, you know, there can always be minor variances to any policy, even if it's an aged one, but in this case, it's particularly a new and fresh one, and I think this is inevitably going to happen, you know, as well. Not that that it will be the first of many, but also that there's going to be, you know, however you want to characterize it, teething pains, lessons learned, whatever, as we go through this and learn some things about how we want to actually implement it to get the desired results. So very happy to approve this as well. Any other discussion before I call the vote? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. So there you go. You will need to, before you do building permits and everything like that, there is an appeal period for this, but if you follow up with Spencer and Mike, they'll make sure that you stay on the right side of all that stuff, and then you're good to go, okay? Thank you. And the next timed item we have is at 11 o'clock, so until then, we will start through departmental reports, if everybody's good. And the first one up will be the fire chief. 8.1A, report 2023-061 from the fire chief regarding monthly activities. Chief, is there anything you want to highlight for council before I ask them for questions?
Wanted to highlight that we've got a new field officer, and he stopped in to visit for the emergency management sector. And I've also attached our compliance for 2022 that we received in the month of May. 5101 is here. We anticipate that it will be in service the end of June, and I hope to do a visit. I know some of you saw it this week when you were at the Tempsford station. With that, we continue work on our DCP program, so trying to ensure that we've got enough instructors in place to be licensing drivers in-house through our RIFSOC program. And then just an update, I know that everyone's aware, but a reminder for everyone watching that we do have a burn ban in effect. Recreational fires for cooking are still permitted.
Questions for the chief on the report? Councillor Mitchell.
The inspection of assembly occupancies, how many assembly occupancies are there in Zorra Township?
So we pulled the impact data to look at that, and they break down into quite a few different sectors. So we look at libraries, funeral homes, places of worship, campground, halls. We're just over 30, but we're continuing to keep track of them as we update our community risk assessment profile as well.
Okay. And my other question is, there was a charge for failure to comply with conditions of fire permits, and I looked in the bylaw, and it's what I saw was a $200 fine. Is it just a matter of sending a notice that they're being fined $200, or is there more to the process than that?
Yeah, so it's actually as per our fees bylaw, section 5, looks at responding to an open air burn bylaw violation as outlined in the regulation. It's actually current MTO rate per hour per vehicle, plus our personnel costs. So it's looks like a minimum charge normally of about $1,500.
So it's much more significant than a simple $200 fine for not following the rules. Okay, thank you.
Any other, Councillor Stewart?
Yeah, just only because it's just a small note in here about Camp Molly that went off over the weekend. I remember when you brought the video from the previous one, sort of highlighted for members of the public that weren't able to attend at all. Is that a plan for the future? Okay, perfect.
I received our photos yesterday from our photographer. She was averaging 2,200 photos a day for us, so I expected quite a few days of her just calling through those photos, but she produced a web link for us yesterday with about 1,200 photos of all 4 days, and they are incredible. And I wanted to give a little bit of a highlight, but I want to take some time and make sure that I can put something together to showcase. If it's okay, I'd like to share. I know that many of you attended the graduation, but it absolutely exceeded all of my expectations. We had 33 young women aged 15 to 18 participate, and actually reached out and looped in a platoon of 14-year-olds as well, who you never know looking at them. They kept up with the 18-year-olds, absolutely. I think the other thing that's really important to highlight that makes Camp Molly special is it's not a department and only those firefighters participating for just members of their community. We were able to reach out to the Big Brothers and Big Sisters Club and Girl Guides, and had partnerships with other organizations to make sure that we were capturing some of the young women that could really benefit from this opportunity. And the other big thing is we had firefighters in Tempsford and in Zorra Township from Zorra, East Zorra, Tavistock, Norwich, Stratford, Thames Centre, Strathroy, Caradoc, Middlesex Centre, Vaughan, Malahide, Norfolk, Minto, South Frontenac, Kitchener, Lambton Shores, Tillsonburg, Bayham, and Calgary Fire. And we had chief officers from Kingston, Belleville, Fort Erie, Waynfleet, North Perth, Woodstock, London, Waterloo, Oshawa. We had the Provincial Fire Investigation Team unit in. And then we had support from Fanshawe, Conestoga, OPP, Oxford EMS, Orange, and London Airport over the course of the 4 days. So the reach that this program had to bring people to our community and support these young women, I can't say enough about. And I absolutely will showcase that. I hope to have something together for you here shortly.
Anyone else? Yeah, I guess I'll leave, we'll wait and see that when it comes. But just because it's fresh, just have to say, and Deputy Mayor Grigg said in her remarks on the graduation day, you know, you go there thinking you're going to inspire this 31 graduates, 33 graduates, you know, trying to come up with some words to inspire them. But when you go there and you see what they did, it truly was the case that they were inspiring of us. To watch what they did was just amazing. And as I said on the day, not enough thanks in the world for all the volunteers that did it, right? All the people who literally didn't take pay. A whole bunch of them gave up pay to be there. One of our firefighters gave up vacation time to be there, and all kinds of organizations that donated to it. But first and foremost, our fire chief, who the whole thing would not have happened without Chief Kerwin making it happen. So, but mainly really looking forward to that presentation later, because I think for people who didn't see what was going on in those 4 days, you can't adequately describe what went on. So really looking forward to that, and thanks, Chief. Any other questions on the report? Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Stewart, that report 2023-061 from the fire chief be received and filed for information purposes only. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. I should just get you guys to like sit on one side, then I can just. And next up is, sorry, 8.2A, Recreation Department and Staff, Report 2023-071 on monthly activities. Anything you want to highlight for council in there?
Nothing major is happening. We're busy with our summer programming and park cleanup and getting ready for the summer activities. Our hall rentals are back at it and better than before, so we are experiencing a lot of fun things happening in our department right now.
Any questions for Steph on the report? Councillor Mitchell.
Actually, since he's here now, it's probably more for Jason and. Yeah. And it has to do with the repairs to the Tempsford spray pads. Was any of that under warranty, or is that all coming out of our?
None of that is covered under warranty, so you'd be out of pocket for us to fix it. But the supplier has been good on some other things that weren't really supposed to be under warranty, and they've covered in the past. So I think it's a fair trade that we're on the hook for this one.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions on the report? So the only thing I would say is thank you very much for that. I think people were really watching that. It was warm weather at the time. People really wanted to be on that splash pad. I think for our staff here, communications on it was really good and proactive and well received by the community. But even better received was that it was quickly repaired and back up and operating. And I think people were very understanding of the reality of the situation and appreciative ultimately that it just got up and running and water was spraying out on a really, 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 really hot day. So thank you very much. Any other questions before I read the motion? Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Stewart, that report 2023-072 from the Director of Recreation Facilities be received and filed for information purposes only. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And we did B already, so recreation is done. And 8.3 A, Building and Drainage Department. Mike, is there anything you want to highlight for council in that report?
Nothing at this time.
Questions from council? Councilor Mitchell.
Mike, you've been at this for more than a few years, so you've seen the ups and downs in construction and activity. And I note that we're a third of the year, way through this year. Number of permits and value of permits are down more than 40%. Starts of new houses have dropped from 41 to 5 compared to 2022. And do you get a sense, based on your experience and talking to other building officials, is this an overall drop in construction activity, or is this just some timing because we do have some major projects going on and it all depends when the permits get issued? Do you see a slowdown?
Yeah, definitely a slowdown. We do have a bunch of stuff coming up that I didn't know since I messaged you back. I think Kingwood's going to do another phase. I've got the paperwork in today, so we'll pick up a little bit here and there, but it'll really depend on sales, right? A little bit of agricultural going on right now. We got some barns going on. That's ongoing. That doesn't really slow up for anything. But the residential end of things definitely slow up.
And the reason I asked the question is because big story from upper levels is pressure to get housing building, and it's partly our fault because we don't, municipality's fault because we charge too much for development charges, and it takes too long to process things, and provincial and federal say, we're going to build, we promise that all these houses are going to be built. Well, when it comes to the end of the day, it's the market that determines what happens, and it's interest rates and availability of skilled labor and material and whatnot. And so no matter what government policy is, it's going to be whether people can afford to buy, whether people can afford to build, and whether there's a business case to be made for it. So I kind of set Mike up on that question so I could make that point, because I'm very frustrated with the pressure that's on us to do better when it's really not. We're doing what we can. It's really forces beyond government that's causing the problems.
Any other questions for Mike? Yeah, I mean, obviously there's lots of development that's already approved in Zorra that is not happening, and not because it's not approved. The fees have already been paid. So in terms of, municipal costs, those costs are sunk already, and yet they're not being built for a lot of reasons, interest rates and inflation and, all kinds of, changing of demand for what types of houses. So very strong and relevant points, I would suggest. Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Stewart, that report 2023-069 from the Chief Building Official Drainage Superintendent be received and filed for information purposes only. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 8.4A, Public Works Department Report 2023-066 from the Director of Public Works regarding monthly activity. Steve, is there anything you want to highlight for council before I ask them for questions?
Not so much highlight, perhaps just update all the CP crossings that have now been completed and have made huge improvements to all those crossings, much needed. So I'm happy to see that was on time. The dates did get pushed back from originally when they first planned. There was a derailment near Brantford, so that kind of pushed things back a couple weeks from the original plan, but they came through with their second dates to get them finalized and stuck to it, and they're done. So that's good.
Questions from council on the report? Councilor Mitchell.
A couple of questions, Steve. One is that the purchase of the new truck. Is this the first time we've used the canoe procurement group? And if it is, what was your feelings of how well it worked?
Yes, this is the first time staff have used the canoe procurement process. It was quite simple and painless. Worked out well. We got what we wanted, and we stayed fairly well within budget. So we're pretty happy with the process for the first time around. So we're looking forward to possibly using it. It is an option. It's not the only options. We can still tender, depending on what type of equipment we're looking for. We can still tender. We can still use other purchasing processes. We're not married to the canoe to do any of that process, but in this situation, it worked out very well for what we're tendering for.
that's good to hear, and more options, the better, so that's good that that one worked out. My other question is, the rear mount packer, and I think one of the justifications of buying it was going to help with the dust suppressant application. So just how is it used when you apply dust suppressant?
So it's mounted on the grader that does the final grading before dust suppressant is applied. We're not seeing as good a results we had hoped, but we just don't have the moisture in the ground right now. We've had such an extended dry period that we're not getting as much, there's too much powder, so it's not packing as well as we'd like to have seen. I think when and if we do get some moisture, we'll see better results with it. So.
Let's hope it's when, not if we get moisture.
Hopefully when, correct.
Thanks, Steve.
Any other questions? Councillor Stewart?
I'll just highlight in discussion with Steve, we were talking about the update on Road 98. Just in here that the construction work to Branco is awarded, that's not the full scope of the work, but that overall we're still on track to meet this year's budget with all the other costs coming in as well.
That's correct. So far at this stage, we're doing some more additional work more in-house with our own staff, so that's going to help us with some savings there in that project where we didn't project that possibly happening. The 9 culverts that are going to be changed, we're going to be doing with our own staff. That's going to help out with the end numbers, but right now our numbers are looking really good. We should be well within that target. There is some pretty extensive guardrail repairs that have to be done that will have to be sourced out near the end of this work, the construction work, just so that we're not conflicting and getting in each other's ways. But we expect that one to be fairly hefty, but I think we're still going to be well within our targeted budget.
Anything else? I'm going to put on my Councillor Mitchell hat, or maybe I should say my Councillor Mitchell mustache, and say we're $75 over budget on that truck. Where is that $75 going to come from? I mean, I can't believe that he didn't ask that question.
We do have some flexibility in our equipment reserve to be able to take that $75.
Glad to hear it. Any other questions on the report? Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Stewart, that report 2023-066 from the Director of Public Works be received and filed, and that funds be transferred from the working fund reserve towards the CN Rail level crossing repair. Any discussion? Fantastic news on the level crossing. I know to a large extent they do that work when they get to it and when it suits them, but I know that you and your predecessors constantly make sure that our crossings are top of mind for them, and I don't think that should go uncredited when those crossings are done now, because that's certainly a phone call that I will be happy not to be getting as often, let's just say, as in the past. It's about the quality of those crossings.
You and I both. And,
yeah.
Yes, and it's a safety issue, and we all know this, and it's frustrating when you can't get cooperation from other entities that you have to work with. But they've between CN and CP, they've been spending lots of considerable time and money on those crossings to make them much better. So it's good to see.
Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And Finance Department, no items. And 8.6, Corporate Services Department. Report 2023-067 from the Legislative Coordinator Deputy Clerk regarding Zorra land acknowledgement updates. Do you want to, we'll just wait. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm good with that, yeah. So if council's good, the clerk is suggesting we do that one after the delegation. I can't remember what time that one's at, 11:30, I think, 11:35. You're good with that? Okay. So then we are moving on to item 9, correspondence requiring direction. Is there any questions regarding any of those items before I read the motion? Questions for staff on any of those? So I have one for 9A then, that is blank right now. Moved by Stewart, seconded by Mitchell, that staff complete the AMO municipal delegation request form, request a meeting with. So the question then would be, what delegations do we want to make at AMO? I'll start. I think we should be making one to the Ministry of Education with respect to the memorandum of understanding that we directed our staff to negotiate. That's since then the Library Board, Oxford County, and the Thames Valley School Board have all directed their staff to negotiate. I think we should follow up with the minister. The minister was interested in that, and we certainly saw some of the spirit of that memorandum of understanding reflected in Bill 98. So I think we should make a follow-up one on that. To me, I'm not aware of any others that would be worth us making delegations at AMO in August, but this is the time to think of those. When is the deadline again? So it's now or never, basically. If we don't want to add any others, that's good. We can just do MOE. Any other discussion?
Yeah, I don't, like, we generally talk about aggregate, but that's, TAPMO is the lead one on that, so, there appears, and we'll talk about it later, appears to be some changes on the provincial policy statement that we would have certainly wanted to talk about. So I don't know if there's any benefit of Steve Clark. So those are the big ones that we always hammer away at. So
Okay.
off the top of my mind, I can't think of anything else.
So then I have moved by Stewart, seconded by Mitchell, that staff complete the AMO municipal delegation request form requesting a meeting with Ministry of Education with the priority of request as specified above. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 9B, correspondence from Safe and Well Oxford regarding opioid, it's just, yeah, 9B and C. Correspondence from Safe and Well Oxford regarding opioid crisis proposed resolution. Any questions on that before I read the motion? All right, I'm reading this one once. Moved by Stewart, seconded by Mitchell. Whereas the Township of Zorra recognizes that challenges of mental health, addictions, specifically opioids and homelessness, are complex issues that have a significant and detrimental impact on the residents of the County of Oxford and surrounding areas within Ontario. Whereas addressing and responding to these issues has placed extreme stress on all levels of municipal and non-municipal programs and services, including various not-for-profit organizations and provincially funded health services within the County of Oxford and surrounding areas. Whereas mental health, opioids, and homelessness trends are in recent years at an all-time high, and such prevalence is impacting the overall well-being of the people of the County of Oxford and surrounding areas. Whereas Council acknowledges that approaches to addressing and responding must include diverse and inclusive approaches to these issues and should not be viewed as a single solution response. Whereas addressing and responding will require strategies and practices specific and uniquely designed for the County of Oxford and surrounding communities. Whereas Council accepts that the responsibility to address these challenges rests with community stakeholders, partners, residents, as well as federal and provincial governments and agencies, whereas challenges of mental health, addictions, and homelessness are not unique to the County of Oxford and surrounding areas within Ontario. Now, therefore, be it resolved that Council provide direction to staff to send a letter to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, the Minister of Children, Community and Social Services, the Minister of Health, Minister of Solicitor General, MPP Arnie Hardeman, MP Dave McKenzie, to the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, AMO, Rural Ontario Municipal Association, Roma, County of Oxford, and all area municipalities advocating for the additional resources to combat the opioid crisis in Ontario. Any discussion? Councillor Mitchell.
And my comments to this one will also apply to the next motion, because they're both the same type of issue. And when I first read the council agenda, I thought, they're going to want us to declare an emergency of some sort. And to me, that is political grandstanding in most cases, because there's no point in declaring an emergency unless you have a plan to deal with the emergency. And we've seen multiple situations where emergencies are declared and nothing ever happens about it. And this recognizes that Zorra Township doesn't have the resources to deal with the opioid emergency on our own, or to deal with the homeless on our own. It's just asking us that we use our influence to put whatever pressure we can on the people that do have the resources to deal with it, and recognizing that that is a problem. One thing I would point out, and this comes back to my anal attention to detail, is that Dave McKenzie is no longer the Member of Parliament. That should be an alteration to to the motion.
Anyone else? I would, I agree with all those comments. I would point out that we do have an obligation because the Safe and Well Oxford plan that the correspondence comes from is a result of the provincial requirement from the Ministry of Solicitor General to have a community safety and well-being plan. And that is driven, the reason that came from Solicitor General was it was directed at area municipalities that fund policing. The idea being that some of these issues you're addressed in here end up resulting in policing costs, court costs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I would add, as the new chair of the Safe and Well Oxford Steering Committee, that specifically to your point about, not declaring an emergency, but actually having, policies and action items, that's absolutely the direction of the Safe and Well Oxford Steering Committee right now, is to move as rapidly as possible towards actions, mostly with partners. The steering committee is exactly that, a steering committee, but to look for those opportunities and get the partners doing more and removing barriers to them doing more. We've already identified in some cases where they are willing and able to do more, but other partners in it are not willing. So we're working on those things to try and address the specific issues in here, but that absolutely we cannot do them alone in Zorra or even Oxford as a whole under the Safe and Well Oxford plan. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 9C, correspondence from Safe and Well Oxford regarding call to end homelessness. Any questions on that before I read it? Moved by Stewart, second by Mitchell. Whereas the homelessness crisis is taking a devastating toll on families and communities, undermining a healthy and prosperous Ontario. Whereas the homelessness crisis is the result of underinvestment and poor policy choices of successive provincial governments. Whereas homelessness requires a range of housing, social service, and health solutions from government. Whereas homelessness is felt most at the level of local government and residents that they serve. Whereas municipalities and local service providers are doing their part but do not have the resources, capacity, or tools to address this complex challenge. And whereas leadership and urgent action is needed from the federal and provincial government on an emergency basis to develop, resource, and implement a comprehensive plan to prevent, reduce, and ultimately end homelessness in Ontario, therefore be it resolved that Council of the Township of Zorra call on the federal and provincial governments to urgently, I, acknowledge that homelessness in Ontario is a social, economic, and health crisis. I commit to ending homelessness in Ontario. I work with Association of Municipalities of Ontario, AMO, and a broad range of community, health, Indigenous, and economic partners to develop, resource, and implement an action plan to achieve this goal. And further, that a copy of this motion be sent to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Minister of Children, Community, and Social Services, Minister of Health, Minister of Solicitor General, MPP Ernie Hardeman, MP Dave McKenzie, to the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, County of Oxford, and all area municipalities. Just before I ask for comments, I made the assumption on the previous one and on this one that staff will just, not Dave McKenzie, it'll go to the office of. Yeah. Comments? Ditto. Ditto. Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And boards and committees, and I have, before I read it, I have a motion here to receive and file A through C. Paul will give a verbal update on A. I will give a verbal update on B and C. Is there any questions on any of those before we go ahead with that? Anybody want to do anything different than receive and file all three? Okay, Paul.
Okay, we had a brief meeting at the Upper Thames on May 23rd. Started out with a presentation from Brad Verscher, who is in charge of lands, facilities, and conservation areas. So his responsibilities are not only the three major conservation areas, but also the smaller ones, which include Embro and Harrington, and also all other lands that are owned and operated or leased out by the Upper Thames. Then we had a report from the Finance and Audit Committee that we accept the financial statements from 2022 and we reappoint the auditors. And we had an excellent report on Category 3 cost apportioning agreements. And Category 3s are the ones that where municipalities have an option whether they want to continue receiving these programs and services from the Upper Thames. And if they do, then they will there will be memorandum of understanding signed between each municipality and the Upper Thames. And in Oxford County, Upper Thames staff will be talking to county staff, and the way my understanding is that they will, if Oxford County wants to keep all the programs, then all the programs will be kept in and the appropriate agreements will be written. If Oxford County decides that they don't want to take all the programs, then they will be approaching each municipality to see if the ones that got left out will be included. So if council wants, I can arrange, or our staff can arrange, to have Upper Thames staff attend a council meeting, and they can explain this in much more detail and much better than I can. So at the end of we can decide whether we want to do that or not. But the sample MOU that was included in our agenda was for Oxford County, and it certainly gave a lot of good information on that. And then we went on a very interesting tour, boarded a bus with the board members that were present and the staff. We started out, we went to the Upper Thames Demonstration Farm, which is just outside west of Thorndale. We had a presentation there on the tree planting program and also on controlled drainage project. And regular drainage, the water just runs through the tile and goes away. The controlled drainage has kind of like little dikes built into it so that they can hold some of the water, so that potentially when there's no rain like we have right now, that water would be available. So it's something, it's being used in other parts of the world, but it's relatively new to Ontario, so it's something Upper Thames has worked on. We then got back on the bus and we drove through the back end of Fanshawe Conservation Area that I'd never been to, which is where the Fanshawe cottages are all located. We drove through there and saw how some of those cottages are more than cottages now, and we've talked before about the issues with that. When we continued through, we came through the back end or the north end of London Airport. We talked about how the Upper Thames is responsible for removing trees that are in the flight path with no payment coming back from Transport Canada for doing that kind of work. And we headed back to the main gate and went over the dam and went back through. There's 530 campsites, so we drove back through there and saw all the different trailers and whatnot that there. And then we stopped at, the final stop was at the, we also drove by the Pioneer Village and a bunch of other features that are at Fanshawe. And then our last stop was at the Children's Safety Village, which was kind of at the end of the road in the conservation area. And that was set up about 20 years ago by an independent board organization. And they had little mini buildings and streets. And the idea was that kids would come in and they would be taught safety, street safety and whatnot in this little village. Well, over time, the board is unable to continue. The buildings have fallen into the little buildings have fallen into disrepair. And at the start of this year, it was turned back over to the Upper Thames. It's been on Upper Thames property. It's unfortunate to see this project has died, but as a result, the Upper Thames now has use of a nice building about the size of our township offices here, which includes a large meeting room, a couple of classrooms, kitchenette, some storage area, and so the Upper Thames is going to incorporate that into their programming. And probably most of the little village of itself will be demolished at some point. Upper Thames staff did a tremendous job putting this together, put a lot of work into it. There was nonstop commentary as we rode on the buses by the different people who knew their area of responsibility, giving us nonstop information. They even put together an excellent pamphlet on everything that we saw that day. My disappointment was that 5 of the new members of the board chose not to attend the tour, so they missed out, which I found that very frustrating, and I'm sure staff was disappointing that there wasn't more directors show that interest in it. So that was that was our meeting. So I'll throw back the question, does council feel it would be worth in having Upper Thames staff come to talk about, I've talked about it, but they can talk about a lot more detail and lot more understanding of the whole thing than.
I mean, I get to hear from Upper Thames when the, I can't remember the name of the title now, Executive Director?
Tracy?
Tracy?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's say Tracy.
Yeah.
Comes, although hasn't come in a few years since COVID, but usually comes to county council and makes a
Doesn't-
presentation at
yeah.
budget time. But if council wants to, I mean, there's two not here today, so maybe we should maybe raise a question
I
with
would
them
suggest
offline,
it.
but-
I think you know, a 15-minute presentation on this. I've tried to let council be aware of what's going on,
Yeah.
but it's very, very complicated and.
Yeah.
we can-
I would certainly not
Yeah.
object to having them in here and give a
So
presentation.
if I
on-
can leave that with our staff to contact
Yeah.
their staff and fit it into an agenda where
Done.
it would work.
Done.
Okay, thank you.
10B, top aggregate producing municipalities of Ontario. So there was a meeting last week on Thursday that I was unable to attend because I had other duties. So I can't tell you what happened at that meeting. And before that, there hadn't been one for several months. Most of the work that TAPMO has been doing for months and months and months right now has been in collaboration with Wellington County and supporting that activity on the appeals for property tax assessment of aggregate pits. So I can't give you an update on what has happened at the last meeting last week, but certainly the direction that work has been going with respect to property tax assessment has been all positive so far, and hopefully will continue to be, notwithstanding that they have now announced some potential changes to streamlining of certain approvals, certain types of approvals, which I would expect that this council and our communities would have at least some concerns with. Some of it seems entirely appropriate, but some of it seems quite concerning, and I know will result in issues for residents near to aggregate pits. So that's really the only update I can give you on TAPMO at this time, but happy to take any questions on it. On Community Schools Alliance, so the main update there is with respect to Bill 98, and the Community Schools Alliance chair made a presentation to the standing committee on that. That was, I think, well received. It was certainly an excellent presentation. If you want, I have video of it that I can send you if you want. Yeah. Other activity that I'm not legally allowed to update you on at this time, but at a future council meeting, I will be able to give you more updates on some work that the Community Schools Alliance is doing right now. But the main thing I would highlight is the annual general meeting coming up and the correspondence that's in the agenda around that. My term under the Constitution, because the Community Schools Alliance actually has a formal constitution, my term is up. So I will be submitting my name again, and hopefully will be reelected, but that will happen at that AGM. It's immediately before AMO. I can't remember the exact date, but it's immediately before AMO and will be virtual because of the nature of the Community Schools Alliance member municipalities. We have member municipalities, members on the executive who are up near Thunder Bay, don't always come to AMO. So we switched to virtual during COVID and have decided for the AGM to stay with virtual. Advantages and disadvantages, but overall it means that more members, the very definition of the group is that it is, rural and northern and single school communities, and some of those communities are not able, or it's difficult for them to attend in-person meetings in Toronto or in this case London or Ottawa. So, strong work going on right now at the Community Schools Alliance, I would suggest, with respect to inputs on Bill 98, and certainly some of the changes that are in Bill 98 are highly reflective of policy suggestions that the Community Schools Alliance has made over the last 10 years. So it's not a perfect bill, no bill is. There's certainly things that I would personally disagree with, but in the context of the Community Schools Alliance and its work, there are specifics in it that address issues that the Community Schools Alliance has raised for a decade. So far so good. We'll see how the bill ends up before it's actually passed. Councillor Mitchell.
I haven't read Bill 98, so I don't know exactly what's in there, but the moratorium on school closures, where is that? I've heard in the media some rumblings that it's time to move on from that. Where is that right now as far as the government?
The moratorium is still officially in place. We have not officially heard anything other than that. The Alliance has suggested for at least a year, if not 2 years now, to the provincial government that we understand that the moratorium can't stay in place forever, and that there's probably good reasons right now for it to be lifted in some cases. What we have suggested to them is that that when and if it is lifted, that if there are not significant changes in place for rural, northern, and single community schools, and specifically with respect to the Rural and Northern Education Fund, which was implemented by the provincial government to allocate funding to rural, northern, and single community schools to try and help them provide services that are challenging for them to deliver on a small population basis, that if there weren't changes to those things, that they lift the moratorium for all schools except those that qualify for the Rural and Northern Education Fund. We've had discussions with the ministry about that. They have not said yes or no to that, but again, they haven't said that they are going to lift the moratorium. But I do think that it is a reality that that moratorium is not going to stay in place forever. It's simply not possible. But in terms of when that's going to be lifted and exactly how it's going to be lifted, at this point it would be guesswork. I have my thoughts on what's going to happen, but I wouldn't want to say them out loud at this point, I think. But yeah. Generally good direction, I would say, from the point of view of the Community Schools Alliance. Any other questions on that? Then I have moved by Stewart, seconded by, seconded by Mitchell, that items 10A through C be received and filed for information purposes only. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 11, information items. So I do have one here, before I read it, to receive and file A through F. So do we want to do anything, first question, do we want to do anything different than receive and file A through F? We're good. I guess there's only two of you and you guys moved and seconded it, so. Paul?
Receive and file, but I do have comments on B and a question on C.
Okay, so A, nothing then. B, Paul?
Yeah, I was glad to see the report on I had heard that the community bus was no longer going to be stopping in Thamesford. They had changed their route, and I was glad to see this report included to explain exactly why that was happening. And this route was implemented about the time that the previous council was debating whether to become involved in the North Oxford bus proposal. And at that time, I made the statement that I thought this one that runs through Woodstock, Ingersoll to London had a chance to be successful, that ridership would support it because it was connecting Thamesford with the three largest towns or cities in the vicinity. As it turned out, the ridership has been pretty abysmal and has resulted in the decision to alter the route and not go through Thamesford anymore. That's also in the report, it's referenced the PC Connect in Perth County, which I believe is 6 routes running multiple times a day, and it has been a financial disaster. The last numbers I saw on that were that it was costing about just under $100 per rider for the first few years that it operated in it. So they, as with the Middlesex one, has received another $1 million or roughly in funding above the first $1.5 million, and they're lobbying hard to get more money to keep going with it. So unlike Field of Dreams, where you build it, they'll come, apparently when you build community busing, not everybody comes to it. So my misgivings on this are well known, but it's certainly interesting that almost 3 years down the road, this is the result of what's happened. So I just wanted to make that comment. Yeah, so my question on that was, according to the Ontario Federation of Agriculture latest email that I got was that the province has backed off on the proposed change to the PPS that would allow up to 3 residential severances off for each farmland, which not only was going to take up 5 to 10% of usable farmland, but would basically be the end of any new or expanded agricultural or livestock buildings in Ontario, because all these residential would have to meet MDS, and that basically locked, it was going to end it. So, Marcus, you have more insight on this. I just wondered what's the latest.
Sort of attempting to clarify their what their intention was with that, but that has not been, changed officially. So the public comment period under the ERO is still open now and was extended to, do you remember when it was extended to? At least a month.
I think it was an additional 60 days.
Yeah, an additional 60 days for more input. I think that's a reflection basically that they have heard type and quantity of comment on some of the changes that they were not anticipating. So I think that's a positive sign, but I guess I would say, but it hasn't changed yet. So all at once I would say, on the one hand, many people told me that, well, the province isn't going to change that, it's not going to happen. But they've indicated, at least in a clarification on what they intended, which means, and possibly the intention to change it. I think the same could be said for some of the other ones. So I think it's a signal that we should absolutely keep up the pressure, that when we think that those things are not right for Zorra, that we should say that we think they're not right. We should say the reasons that we think they're not right. Whether this council says it specifically or says it through Oxford County or regional government is up to this council. But I think there's an indication from the province that they are listening to their agricultural partners and their municipal partners. There's an indication that they may change some things, but it's not changed yet. But overall, it says to me that we should keep doing the work that we're doing with our staff to assess whether these changes are good or bad for our communities, articulate the reason that we think they are good or bad, and communicate it to them. I know I've had conversations with Peggy Breckveld, the president of Ontario Federation of Agriculture, to express my thanks to her and the OFA for the work that they're doing. Oxford County is preparing a second now, more detailed report on the analysis of the planning implications of the bill, the proposed provincial planning statement. And that document, Oxford County is basically providing the subject matter expertise for the Western Ontario Wardens Caucus, which is going to be meeting on Friday, and formalizing the Western Ontario Wardens' input to the province on the proposed provincial planning statement. So all that together, I think, again, is to say that it is certainly not perfect. I think we have justification for the areas that we think that it's not perfect. We have indications that the province is listening. The question is, will the changes, and to what extent will the changes be reflected in the ultimate document that's passed? But I think it's going to be at least another 2 months before we find that out. But so far, so good.
I think to indicate, first of all, they've had a history of rushing all their legislation through, and the fact that they've delayed it by 60 days is promising, and the indication that the farm severances, as you say, there's still some things in there about settlement expansion and that I haven't heard anything about that.
No.
But, yeah, I agree with you. Still need to, until the legislation goes through, we need to, but it is unusually encouraging, I think,
Yeah.
based on the last couple of years of legislation.
Yeah, it is. I mean, when they extended the deadline, I think that was absolutely a good sign. And the letter from the minister to those specific agricultural groups, indicating that they understood the concerns and clarifying their reasoning is a good sign as well. It's really the dialogue that you hope that would happen. So, I mean, coulda, shoulda happened before, but better that it's happening late than not at all. So, but I think the key thing though is that we need to keep up the pressure, justifying what we think is right for Zorra until that legislation is finalized. D, correspondence from Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry regarding streamlining of approvals under the Aggregate Resources Act. I do have a note here that county planning will be providing comment at a later date, because there's absolutely significant planning implications to that. I mean, there's a lot of the changes are specific to regulation of aggregate extraction, but a lot of them are absolutely directly affecting planning. So we will be getting a report on that at a future date. I don't know if you're involved in that, Spencer, or not.
Yeah, I do know that our policy team sent out a couple of memos just for staff yesterday to review, and then I think sometime next week we'll be looking at those and working towards making a submission.
Excellent. And E, correspondence from the Safe and Well Oxford Steering Committee. I think we dealt with those. And F, correspondence from Roma on the drainage dispute with CN. All good? Moved by Stewart, seconded by Mitchell, that items 11A through F be received and filed for information purposes only. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And we are now up to delegation time. 11 o'clock. Pam Antonio and Frank Gross, Oxford County, transitioning the Blue Box program to extended producer responsibility. One or both of you going to present, or it's up to you, however you want to do it. I would just remind you, as I always do, assume that council's read the whole report. Highlight for us what you want to highlight, and then I'll ask them for questions, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Mayor, council, and staff. Yeah, Pam and I are here today to provide an update on the new Blue Box regulation and the Blue Box program that will be transitioning to producer responsibility. And yeah, we'll just touch on the key points of our presentation here in the interest of time, and can answer any questions after. Next slide, please. Under the Resource Recovery and Circular Economy Act, the province has developed extended producer responsibility models for existing recycling programs like tires and e-waste and household hazardous waste. Blue Box material is the last program to transition to an EPR model. And the objective is to promote circular economy where waste material is diverted for reuse in manufacturing, to offset the use of raw materials, and make producers responsible for end-of-life management of product packaging, and hopefully strengthen recycling markets and promote innovation in products and product packaging. As of January 1st, 2026, producers will become fully accountable and financially responsible for Blue Box, collecting Blue Box materials and recycling them, and implementing a province-wide common collection system. Municipalities will municipal Blue Box programs will be transitioning to the producer program starting July 1st this year, and the transition period will extend until December 31st, 2025. During the transition period, producers will be required to maintain the same level of service as the municipal programs. For Oxford County, this will result in approximately $2 million in annual savings, not having to operate the Blue Box program. Next slide. Under the current Blue Box program, municipalities have been responsible for providing the Blue Box collection program, and it's been funded. 50% funding is received from the producers. Under municipal Blue Box programs, most municipalities, including Oxford, collect from institutional, commercial, and industrial properties, although that material is not eligible under the current funding model. So those areas typically are downtown areas, BIA areas, small businesses, small offices, and farming operations. Large IC&I have a separate regulatory requirement to implement their own source separated programs and ensure materials recycled. So facilities like hospitals, shopping malls, restaurants, so forth, have to meet those regulatory requirements. Next slide. Under the Transition Blue Box program, that will be led by the producers. It's meant to be a residential program, but will also include public spaces, schools, not-for-profit, long-term care, and retirement homes. Producers will not be responsible to provide blue box collection services to the other ICNI locations, some of which are currently receiving curbside collection under the municipal programs. Producers will also be required to report annually to show that they're meeting the collection and recycling targets as identified in the regulation. Under the EPR Blue Box program, we expect that it'll include an expanded list of materials. It's pretty generic in the regulation. It's defined as packaging, paper products, and packaging like products. Whereas under the historical Blue Box program, it's been very specific as to the acceptable materials. The 5 mandatory materials like aluminum cans, bottles, plastics, and newsprint, and then some of the other optional items depending on different municipal programs. The Blue Box transition timeline, as I mentioned, will occur starting July 1st over the next 2.5 years, and groups of municipalities will be transitioning this year, 2024, and in 2025. Oxford County's transition date is defined or established as December 31st, 2025. During the transition period, there will be no change to the Blue Box collection program in Oxford County. The county will continue to manage the program and will continue to receive 50% funding as they have under the current program. And the county will continue to report to the regulatory authority on collection volumes. Under the new Blue Box regulation, the producers are defined as the brand holder with the closest connection to product packaging in Ontario. Producer responsible organizations are also defined in the regulation and are organizations that can represent one or more producers in meeting their regulatory requirements. Circular Materials, they're a national pro, and they're supporting producers to meet their regulatory obligations, and they've been selected in Ontario to administer the common collection system. Other pros may come forward over time to oversee the Blue Box collection and processing systems. So the focus of Circular Material has been to ensure Blue Box collection for the municipalities that are transitioning this year and into next year. So that's been their main focus, to ensure that they have either private contractors in place or agreements with municipalities to continue to operate the Blue Box program during the transition period. The RFP for collection services that will include the Oxford County collection area is expected to be released later this year. Bidders that want to bid on those RFPs are required to bid on at least one catchment area. Circular Materials isn't specifically soliciting bids from municipalities for post-transition collection services. However, municipalities could hypothetically submit a bid proposal if they're interested in providing collection services, although they would have to, as I mentioned, bid at least in one catchment area, and in most cases would be an area that extends outside their municipal boundaries. And I'll pass the next slides over to Pam.
Thank you, Frank. So under the current Blue Box program that we have in place, only select residential sources are eligible for collection in Blue Box funding. However, because municipalities have been running the program, they have elected to provide that service to non-eligible sources, such as your BIAs and farming, commercial farms, daycares, those sorts of organizations. And they've been providing that service with the understanding that any costs associated with the collection of that material and processing of that material would be covered through material revenue sales and through the tax base. So once the program transitions to full producer responsibility in 2026, any non-eligible source that's currently receiving curbside collection of blue box material will no longer receive that service. And so that'll be definitely a change that municipalities or non-eligible sources across Ontario, including Oxford County, are going to notice a change. Next slide, please. So some properties located along a curbside collection route will contain both eligible and non-eligible sources. So for example, a mixed-use property containing apartments located above a business, as is commonly found in BIAs, only the apartments would receive collection, blue box collection, but not the business. And in these instances, the collector must make then a judgment call as far as whether the material in the blue box came from a residential source or from a business source, and that's how they'll determine what gets collected. Another example would be in a community where you've got maybe a convenience store located in a residential area. Again, the residences will receive blue box collection, but anything put out by the convenience store would not receive service. So it's unknown exactly how many eligible sources participate in the blue box program right now across the county. So we do know that within Oxford County, approximately 5% of the material that is collected comes from the ISSAN sector, and that's through historical audits, and that equates to about 450 tons annually. The following maps in front of you depict in blue residential sources, and in pink represent where the non-eligible sources are located, and we did that based on zoning information. And so the assumption that we've made here is that any of those pink areas located in the blue residential areas are potentially non-eligible sources that could be affected by this change in service as of 2026. And if you go to the next slide, the first three maps that we're showing you were the three urban areas, and then these two maps are just an example of some of the rural villages. So the Highway 2 in Chelmsford is going to be an area that would be impacted by this. Next slide, please. Thank you. So there's been much discussion within the waste management industry as to what, if anything, should be done to address non-eligible sources who are going to find themselves without service. And some of the options that municipal waste management employees have been discussing is, the municipality could continue to provide a curbside collection service to these non-eligible sources, either at full cost to the municipality or possibly through a user pay system. We anticipate obviously the highest level of participation would be through a municipally provided program that's also funded by the municipality, but we do expect that if we were to put in a user pay system, that there would be still a strong form of participation. In both cases, services could either be delivered as it's currently done at the curb, or possibly through drop-off locations. And one of the things to keep in mind is that once the residential portion is removed from the collection service, all of a sudden collecting 450 tons of material annually becomes very costly, so that we're losing that economy of scales once the residential portion is removed. Another option would be for the non-eligible sources to pursue and secure their own recycling service and completely fund that themselves. Obviously, we expect that this option probably wouldn't be well received by that sector, and that we anticipate that program participation would decrease and probably see that material end up in landfill. Next slide. Once the Blue Box program transitions to full producer responsibility in 2026, we expect that residents may notice some service impacts. So it is possible that the collection day and or the frequency of collection could change, and it's possible that your garbage and recycling could be collected on different days. How the material may be collected could also change, so we're currently a single stream system, but it is possible that blue box collection could go back to a two-stream system where fibers and containers are separated into different boxes. We might also see that there might be different collection programs or different collection systems for materials like cardboard and glass as well. And lastly, customer service related, anything related to blue box services, that customer service will be covered by the producers and their associated contractors providing the service. The transition program may also impact how public space recycling and convenience depots are operated. So producers are not obligated to maintain the same recycling receptacle locations that are currently in place in the municipalities, but they will be required to have receptacles in place, and they will have to meet the number of recycling locations will be based on a formula based on population densities. Convenience depots is defined as a depot that is operating where there's a current curbside collection service. And in these instances, the producers are not obligated to fund those depots that are providing collection of blue box materials. So in Oxford County, we have blue box collection depots at the Waste Management Facility, City of Woodstock's Enviro Depot, and the Town of Tillsonburg's Transfer Station. They would be affected by this change in the regulation. And at present, the county has been speaking with the producers to see if there's any interest in funding, continuing to fund the blue box portion of those depots. So we're going to have to do some work and collect some data to supply to them. Basically, it's going to come down to the amount of tonnage that's collected and the cost to collect that material as to whether or not the producers will fund them. Next slide. So as we move forward and get closer to 2026, we'll be pursuing developing a comprehensive communication plan with our communication division at the county, and particularly we want to make sure we do early targeted communication to the non-eligible sources. Things that we need to consider is whether or not the county should continue to provide collection services to the non-eligible sources, and if so, how would that be funded? Would we fund convenience depots? Would we continue to fund that? Who would report to the authority when residential developments begin to start coming online and are ready for collection? About what to do with municipal stranded assets, and whether or not the county there should be municipal participation in the formal bid process for collection services. Next step. Next slide, thank you. So we're coming to the end of we have one more delegation to do with the town of Ingersoll, and we'll be collecting comments and providing that information back to County Council at the end of this month, where we'll be seeking direction on where they would like, how they'd like us to proceed as far as whether they would like the county to proceed in participate in the competitive bid process. And any other key decision-making items that we need to address. And that's the end of our presentation. So thank you for having us, and Frank and I can certainly answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you both. Questions from council? Councilor Stewart.
Yeah, just trying to find the information here in the presentation, but businesses are excluded, as I understand. They'd have to find their own way. Does that include ag business as well?
Yes, just to clarify that, so if there's a resident, so if there's a home on an agricultural piece of land, that home would be eligible to receive blue box collection, but the commercial farming operation would not be.
And then it's up to the collector to determine whether the box is full of residential things or agricultural things. Okay. I was wondering if this type of program has been rolled out in any other province already, or in the States anywhere. Has that, and what kind of success has that shown?
So right now, we're trying to follow the model that's been implemented in British Columbia that is working reasonably well. So that's definitely the route that we're going with.
And just looking at this from the primary reason being making the producers more accountable to the waste that they generate, you know, in hopes that it eliminates waste or circular material flow here. But there's a potential here, especially with a rural community, to put 2, possibly even 3 separate collection systems onto our roads. So the net benefit of, in this type of setting versus maybe a heavy or urban setting is, I'd question that. And I guess that's my message to county councils, maybe just taking that into consideration when it comes to whether they're curious or interested in bidding on the work, because I feel like we're going the wrong direction if we have 3 different collection trucks running up and down our streets.
Just to your comment, every municipality that we've visited has expressed the same concerns. And I guess from a provincial level, they're looking at the big picture for the Blue Box program and how they can capture the most amount of material, but that's not necessarily the best. The collection system may not necessarily be the best system in place individually for municipalities.
Councilor Mitchell?
The PROs, are they the companies that are providing garbage and recycling services now? Or are they another level of bureaucracy, whether it's private or whatever, in between the producers of the recyclable product and the companies that provide the services?
So currently, right now, municipalities are responsible for the program, and we contract out or have provided that service with our own municipal forces. So the change will be that now the producers are 100% covering all costs, and an individual producer, like, let's say a 3M, could do their own collection program, or what they've decided to do is band together as a group and have a PRO, which is Circular Materials, coordinate collection contracts on their behalf. So then this PRO then will go and get like a Miller, and MTER Environmental, Waste Management to perform collection services all across the province.
So they're the go-between between the producer group, because it would make no sense that to go around and collect recyclables from one,
Exactly.
you've had 40 different trucks running around picking up
That's
one thing.
correct.
So they're the conduit between the producers and the contractors that are actually providing the service.
Correct.
Okay. Which replaces the municipality's role in that. Will the municipality have any input into the level of service, or could we potentially go from once a week to once a month pickup?
No, municipalities will have no input on that. This is, now, as of 2026, this is 100% funded and driven by the producers.
Okay.
They will determine what they perceive to be the most appropriate level of service. Now, with that said, they do have to comply with the regulation. So the regulation does state that they have to provide Blue Box service at least half, 50% of garbage collection.
Okay. Okay, so they just can't leave it for, okay. There is some regulation in there that makes.
Correct.
Okay.
But if I may add one thing, just to clarify, if the producer feels that they can implement an alternative form of collection for a type of material that they deem will achieve or exceed the recycling targets that are listed in the regulation, then they have that is up to their discretion as to whether or not they implement that alternative form of collection or whether they maintain curbside collection. So an example would be, I apologize for interrupting, but an example would be having a completely separate collection system for cardboard, or maybe it would be like a depot.
So, and my last question is this going to have any impact on the municipality role as far as garbage collection? Because I know in our area, it's the same truck.
No, garbage collection is completely separate and still falls under municipal jurisdiction.
Okay, so it's potentially the truck could be working for the municipality to pick up the garbage and working for the PRO to pick up the recycling.
Yes, but it won't be the same truck doing both.
Okay, so we have more trucks driving around the country to hopefully accomplish. Okay, on the surface it sounds real good, but once you deal into it, maybe not so much.
Just one other question. These 17 of like the founded by the 17, but do all producers have to buy into this? And I'm looking at the list of things, and like something like Amazon's not on here yet. There's going to be an Amazon box in every single recycling box every single week. How are those other businesses captured in this PRO?
So right now, Circular Materials is representing 66% of the blue box tonnage out there right now. But no, those producers can those producers can stay with Circular Materials, or they can separate and go out completely on their own. It's up to them how they want to do it. Right now, as the program is starting, they've chosen to collectively band together, but that we could see changes as the program unfolds.
Anything else? A few comments. First of all, thank you very much. Second time I've heard it. I think I learned things the second time that I didn't learn the first time. But also, a couple of points I would just make here. This is not full producer responsibility, because there's still items that are not recyclable that will go in the waste stream, and the municipality would have to collect that as waste and pay the cost of collecting that as waste. So it's not full producer responsibility. It's what is deemed recyclable is a responsibility of the producer to collect. The second thing is that there was a slide in the presentation that outlines the potential $2 million annual savings. I would highlight that that's potential, and that it's operational, and that if for the many reasons that they outlined, that recycling collection has changed significantly and is not every day, and not once a week, or is on a different day than garbage, or that items that could be recycled for other reasons end up in waste stream as opposed to recycling, even though there's the potential here for more to be recycled, it could end up meaning less diversion from the landfill. The cost there is that the faster the landfill fills up, the sooner we need to expand or build a new landfill, which is millions of dollars just in environmental assessment before you ever even purchase land or start to prepare that landfill or operate it. So the potential net annual savings is $2 million a year, depending on how this actually rolls out, how it's actually implemented on a day-by-day basis, could be significantly different. But overall, County Council, when they received this presentation, was extremely concerned about the potential for even more than 3 trucks, right? You could have a truck going down agricultural roads for agricultural waste. You could have one going down the road for other specific commercial and industrial wastes, then the blue box, and then municipal waste collection. The other thing then is it doesn't directly affect the county collecting waste, except that right now we have massive economies of scale in terms of dollars of efficiency cost in having the same people administer it for both garbage and recycling, but also economies of scale in the fact that we collect both residential and institutional ICI, and therefore have a much higher potential to actually divert from landfill, which is then an indirect cost down the road to the cost of the landfill. So many concerns here. And the last one I would add is the potential for residents to be immensely confused when this happens, if Oxford County is still collecting waste and potentially multiple other agencies collecting recycling, whether it's residential or ICI, or even different categories of ICI, and who's responsible for all those things on which days. So lots of concerns, lots of details still to be worked out. I know that county staff are watching very closely to see as other municipalities begin to implement this, and the problems that they uncover and hopefully solutions that they uncover as well. So lots more to come on this, but I think, as you said in the presentation, I think County Council is going to get a report later in June or in July on how to consider whether we want to be a bidder for this collection service or not. So if this council wants to give any indication to County Council, Oxford County Council on this, I would suggest either today or in future, that would potentially inform Oxford's decision. Anything else? Thanks very much for the presentation, much appreciated. And now, 7B, Stephanie Radu, Dr. Stephanie Radu, Curator, Beachville and District Museum. Welcome. And I'll turn it over to you, Steph.
Is my mic on? Yep. Okay, perfect. Well, hello everybody. This is one of our kind of 2 annual delegations, or twice annual delegations. So just trying to give you an update as to where we are with items with the museum, sort of since the beginning of the year. I think I did my last presentation in January. So yeah, just covering some of the key items from the report that I submitted for the council package. Grounds and building maintenance, one of our key concerns this season was the amount of water that we saw accumulate on the grounds, specifically on the west lawn through the month of April primarily. And the cause of that, we had our culvert kind of redone last year, and the high waters washed away a significant portion of our shoreline along the creek that kind of cuts the northwest corner of the property. This caused one of our bridges to drop, and obviously those bridges are high traffic zones when we have summer camp students there. So, the concern would be how to replace that bridge and repair the bridge, I should say, and make sure that it's safe for all of our visitors to utilize. That is a topic that is at the board level at this point. Other items for grounds and buildings specifically would be the introduction of some new hydro lines off of the south barn. Over the last few years, we've seen growth in a lot of our events, which has produced more of a need for audio on the grounds, the ability to kind of spread our speakers out for our car show announcements, and the ability to expand our light displays for our Light Up the Museum event at Christmas. So the board is currently looking at extending some hydro lines to make sure that we don't have extension cords running the grounds for those events. Moving into collections management, we do have a collections manager that was hired through Canada Summer Jobs. She brings over 10 years of experience working in museums in both Canada and in Europe. She will be working on an accumulated batch of donations that have come into the museum over the last few months and are currently housed in our rotating gallery. The rotating gallery is our space for rotating exhibitions, and so clearing out those materials from the last few months to reclaim that exhibit space is kind of a priority through the summer months. In terms of our processing of other artifacts, the museum did receive a collection of antique tools from Harvey Wadd and his family around 2017, and this was a huge donation with around 400 inventoried items at that time. The collector had inventoried all of his pieces, but we weren't quite aware of the scope of that collection until we formally took on a really thorough accessioning process. So between 2022 and 2023, we extended that accession from 434 items to 698 items. So, and it's still growing. So really Harvey was a very active collector, and the items that we have from him had yet to be fully cataloged. So we refer to that as a loose end donation that needed a bit of attention, and finally is getting the attention that it required. I did just kind of give you a summary of the number of donations that we've accepted over the last little bit. So in 2022, we accepted 11 donations and 155 artifacts. We collected 64 pieces across 12 donations so far this year. I always kind of hesitate to put too much emphasis on those numbers, although they do provide us a good sense of what's coming in or the volume of artifacts that are coming into the collection. But, someone can drop off a shoebox full of photographs, and that can encompass 200 pieces that take up, very little space in the museum, whereas another person could drop off a new pump organ, and that's taking up a lot more space than those 200 photographs. So it does come down to space when we're looking at collecting, but it also comes down to the object types as well. So we continue to digitize a lot of our artifact records. This is a process that has taken us many years. We started digitizing our catalog records in 2018 when we got our Past Perfect catalog. And the catalog will always be a continuously growing piece of software or a continuously growing database. So 1,600 images, roughly 1,600 images have been added to the catalog since January, and we're up to about 11,000 entries. I would probably anticipate that we're going to get to about 15,000 entries outside of just annual growth of our brought in artifacts. So I would anticipate that, what we see is there might be one artifact that has one object ID. I'll give an example, which is the Ray Prouse models. The Ray Prouse models are these beautiful little miniatures of, say, like a farmhouse, and there might be 28 component pieces to that one miniature, but that one miniature has been assigned one object ID. So that is one out of that 11,000 records that are currently in the collection. If we reprocess that and actually give each individual piece its own identifying object ID, which it should have if the accessioning is done properly, then we would see that 11,000 potentially expand to about 15,000 is what I would say. So I think when we talk about the museum collection, we always say it has about 15,000 artifacts and 11,000 are currently given individual records within the catalog. The other piece that I mentioned with our collections management is that we have had a few meetings with archaeologists James Caron and Chris Ellis. We have a group of points and pottery shards and amulets that have long been in the collection, and we were given those pieces without too much information from its original donor. So we're always trying to work with experts in the fields that help us identify pieces within our mixed collection. Potentially, that archaeological background is not something that our staff has full expertise in, and so being able to have these experts come by and help us identify and classify our pieces and give context to our pieces is always an ongoing project. May is Museum Month for the whole group of museums that are represented through the province, and the Ontario Museum Association always tries to get a few campaigns going to promote museums and their significance within their communities. So it was great for us to be able to participate in some of that through this year. I also want to highlight the fact that the museum was nominated for a top honor, the Innovator of the Year Award, through Southwest Ontario's Regional Tourism Organization. This was such a huge opportunity for us to highlight the successes that the museum experienced in 2022. We talk a lot about the momentum that we've had even during the pandemic and the new events that we've launched, the new programs that we've launched through partnerships with excellent organizations all across Oxford County. And this Innovator of the Year Award was a way for us to acknowledge all of that and to really reach out to our partners and say, this is the result of the work that we've been doing. So I highlight the fact that at the time when the award was given out, there was a lot more traffic to our website as well as our social media accounts. It brought a lot of awareness to where the museum is and what we do. And so it was a great opportunity for us to not only celebrate all of the growth that we've seen, but also to make sure new audiences are connecting with our materials and potentially coming out to the site. In May, we were nominated for Oxford Tourism Award. Their category is Tourism Partnership Award. So we'll participate in that event at the Elmhurst on June 13th. And then, we've seen steady growth across all of our social media platforms over the last little while. The analytics that come out of those platforms are all in your report here, and I won't go over them, but I will just identify that we're close to celebrating our 1,000th follower on Facebook. So if you don't already follow us, be sure to help us get closer to that marker. And then events and programs. This is a really key section of what we do as a museum. We always kind of start off our season with the Parks and Rec Easter egg hunt, and we saw the largest crowd that we've had in a number of years at 567 attendees for that event. The fire department from Beachville was there, and as I mentioned, it's kind of primarily organized with the Parks and Rec committee out of Beachville, but it's an amazing event that brings out a lot of young families and a lot of young residents of our area. And it's one event that is set up so that, you know, the older kids aren't bowling over the younger kids and running after the same chocolates. So we had around 266 bags of chocolates handed out that day, and a lot of good feedback about how we're actually structuring that event. We are trying to move a little bit more into facility and room rentals this year as we build on some of our full-time staff that are able to cover facility and room rentals over weekends and evening hours and whatnot. So venturing into that as another source of revenue. We did have an intern from Nipissing this year who is starting to work on educational programs for grade 12 curriculums. So that's great to see our educational programs continue to develop. And then in terms of local events that we've been trying to do outreach at, we did have a booth at the Oxford County Library's Local History Day. We recently participated in Zorra Highland Park's Public Schools Family Fun Day on May 30th. That was a great opportunity for us to just get out and connect with some of the school representatives. The speaker series for the museum continues to grow. This is largely as a result of the work of Helga Thompson and Joan Hutchison, who are at the head of our outreach committees. So we had excellent turnouts in January, February, March, and April. We do usually take the summer off as people are busy at their cottages or in outdoor events and whatnot. So there will be a bit of a hiatus in July and August, but those will return for a full fall speaker series as well in September. The first car show of the year, this is our second year of car shows, and our first car show was held on May 28th. We had over 202 cars that registered for that event and an estimated visitor count of 450 people. This is an amazing turnout for year two. The weather cooperated with us, and we are so excited to see the additional 4 events through the year take place. So our next car show date is June 25th. Our summer camp program is currently at 82% of full capacity with 709 of 860 available camp slots already booked. This is an excellent source of revenue for the museum, but it's also a great source of summer activity for the young people in our area, and it's an opportunity for people who live in the area to have something for their children to do throughout the day. It's a form of daycare certainly, but also just an opportunity for them to come see the museum and envision the museum as a really vital and important institution within their communities. So grants and major projects then. We have been successful in applying through the Uncanada Works program for some summer employees that will run our summer camp. We were given 2 positions this year and awarded the full 75% contribution of those positions through that grant program. So our program coordinator through Uncanada Works has done an excellent job of getting all our paperwork through and making sure that we can get as much funding out of that program as possible. Canada Summer Jobs program, we have seen significant changes in that program since last year. In the last few years, we've received about $8,000 of funding through that program, which was cut in half this year. That's a bit troubling for us because we do use that program to also hire some of our summer staff. We don't know whether this cut to funding is a result of a larger pool of applicants or whether it's changes in some of how our applications are reviewed by those who are establishing our local criteria or local priorities. But if I think at the last opportunity when we were looking at the people who are participating in the program, even the number of businesses in Oxford County that have been awarded this grant has significantly dropped since last year, which is something we'll keep an eye on, but certainly not a amazing condition or situation. So the other piece to really draw out is the ISSAN grant that we're working through. This was a multi-year grant that helps us work on infrastructure projects. Last year we renovated our basements, and this year we have repaved the floor on our barn. I did include one in-progress photo in the report of that work being done, but it's complete now. So the cement floor has been laid. The old asphalt had been pulled out, and we included insulation for the floor as well as a vapor barrier. Stubby's provided an excellent discount on the cement for the project, and everything is currently curing or finalizing over the 30-day period. So once that floor is completely cured, then all of the artifacts from the North Barn will be moved into the the barn that was recently repaved, and we are planning to repave the north barn in 2024. So everything is very much on schedule for getting those floors redone, and then in 2025 through 2026 we'll be looking to climate control barn number 1. So great progress in that. It took us a significant amount of time at the end of last year to empty out that barn and make sure all the artifacts found a new home while the renovation was being completed. The other piece that we've recently seen approved is the installation of 2 accessible doors at those barns. These were approved through the Township of Swax and will be installed in early this month, midway through this month likely. This is a great piece to acknowledge, as we are also updating and working on an accessibility plan for the museum, which will be circulated with our application for the Community Museum Operating Grant at the end of this month. So on an also positive note at the end of this report, just to say that we've hired 6 new museum staff members this year. As I mentioned, 3 of those are on grant programs, which is excellent. And we have our full-time assistant curator and the replacement for myself as I go off on leave already trained and ready to go as well. So our summer staff is looking very strong and very excited for the busy season ahead. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions from council? Councillor Mitchell.
First of all, Stephanie, thanks for the report, and congratulations on the awards and the nominations. And it, as you noted, it not only increases the profile of the museum, but I think it's good for staff morale that when you recognize that all this hard work is being recognized out there in the larger world. And I also want to say I feel a bit sorry for the person that's replacing you for the next tremendously huge shoes to fill for when you're gone. But my question is, you mentioned in there that you had moved some artifacts onto another museum and it followed your policy. So what is the criteria of transferring something that's been donated to the Beachville Museum to another museum?
Okay, so yeah, I should clarify that in these transfers are situations where a donor will come to us and say, we'd like to donate this to the museum, and we'll have a conversation with them about, is this the best home for that piece? That is an educational opportunity for a lot of donors who may be coming in for the first time and just go, I'm starting here, I don't know where this item should go. Maybe it's a family Bible, maybe it's a set of photographs, and really it's our responsibility, according to the standards that are set out for Ontario museums, to always be looking at the best possible home for an artifact. So we know Oxford County Archives, in the case of some of these transfers, they specialize in the preservation of paper documents, photographs, more so than museums do. Museums can have archival holdings, but we want to specialize in the artifacts in the round, or the 3D artifacts, which the archives can't hold and can't preserve. So in this case, we're really having a conversation with the archives and saying, is this something that fits within your collection better or within our collection better? In some instances, they might have other pieces. Like, for example, the Oxford County Archives has an extensive holdings from the Women's Institute branches that have closed in Oxford County. So it made more sense for them to continue to be the kind of central location for all of those records, rather than having 4 sets of records at the archives and 1 set with us, right? So we want to always be working with our colleagues at other institutions to just be having these open conversations about where artifacts are best held, not only for accessibility or, you know, the common sense of where someone might go first to look, but also just in terms of the expertise within those institutions for making sure those artifacts are cared for to the best extent possible. So those particular transfers that happened this year happened in conversation with the archive staff and in conversation with the donors at the time. So there are sometimes instances where a donor might say, I don't want it going to that location, I really want it staying in my community, or I really, you know, I've had bad experiences with other institutions and I want it in a place I know that it's going to be available to me. We will always be receptive to that. And again, it will come down to the question of where the artifact is best housed. So if the donor, if it's an all or nothing, like it either goes here or I take it home with me, again, we would be looking at that circumstance and making the best call for the artifact at that time. So the key element when I mentioned that it's within our policies is because within all museum policies within Canada and Ontario, it's kind of against our policies to compete with each other. So, for example, if a whole bunch of Beachville artifacts ended up in Toronto because longtime residents of Beachville moved to Toronto before they retired, and then at some point they were looking to give the artifacts to a museum, Toronto would not be collecting our artifacts because they would be required ethically to kind of offer them to us first or make them available to us first. And that's just so that we're not stealing each other's artifacts and histories, but that they're made available to the communities that really kind of, you know, develop those artifacts or utilize those artifacts. So it's a way to protect that kind of thing from happening, where all of one community's artifacts would be taken up by a larger city or whatnot. And similarly, if something comes to us where the donor is saying, oh, this was, you know, my mom's, okay, well, where did your mom live? Oh, she lived in Stratford and she was a nurse in Stratford. Well, we're gonna open up communication with the Stratford Museum and say, this has been offered to us. We want to make sure you know of it and can either accept it or reject it as you would be able to. And then we would still continue to work with the donor to establish, like, if that's not the best home, what would be. And that's a way to prevent, you know, we get phone calls all the time that just say, I don't really know what to do with this, but I don't want to put it in the landfill. And we go, no, we don't want you to either, you know? So it's part of the service we provide to help people make sure that when they have the time and the energy to come and try and find a proper home for an artifact, that we can facilitate that as best as possible.
Anything else? Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, just two quick comments. Stephanie, thanks for the report. Deputy Mayor Greg and myself being on the board always have all the updates going on a monthly basis of what's going on in detail, which is awesome. And I'll just make a comment to Paul. They are tough shoes to fill, but she has done a lot of prep and a lot of hard work to select the right staff. And she has a great vision for not just, you know, the next little while and the next full year when she's off on parental leave. So I think she's set us up for success for sure.
Good to know.
I wouldn't leave anybody stranded. No, we've had a lot of time to train. I have a lot of faith in my replacement and a lot of faith in our board to keep, you know, guiding the museum down the path that we've established. So I feel very confident, which is, you know, very fortunate for me as well, going off on leave, is feeling that we're ready to go and that we've done our work to make sure everybody's set up and comfortable with their new roles and new tasks. So yeah, I feel very fortunate it is hard for me to not be there for the year. I'm obviously very nervous about being gone, but I have 100% faith in the staff that we've selected. So thank you, Councillor Stewart, for indicating that. Yes.
Anything else? Thank you very much, Dr. Radu.
Thank you.
And if we don't see you before then, hopefully we will. Best of luck on your parental leave.
Thank you so much.
Enjoy it.
Thanks.
I did mine. And then the next item we have is item 7C, Patricia Marshall from Ingersoll area Indigenous Support, Solidarity and Awareness Network. And Patricia, I will say to you, so first of all, welcome. You can take a seat, you can sit or stand, it's up to you. I would say the same thing to you that I say to all delegations: assume that council's done its homework and read what you submitted, and highlight what you want us to take away from your presentation, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. And I know I'm not controlling the slides, so just going through them at whatever speed desired is probably fine.
Make sure you speak into the microphone. We'll hear you here, but it won't get picked up on YouTube as well if you're not speaking right into the microphone.
Thank you. So, Tansai, Segon Kwe, Bonjour, bonjour, hello. Thank you for having me here, Miigwech. These are just a few of the many ways that we can say hello, and my way of honoring the first people of this land, the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee. My name is Patricia Marshall, and I'm a mixed heritage woman of Anishinaabe, Celtic, and German ancestry. I'm a mother, activist, and community member of Oxford County, and I'm also the founder and director of ISSAN. Oxford County is part of the One Bowl and Spoon Treaty between the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples, who shared the resources of this region. It is time for all of Oxford to acknowledge the nation that as residents, we could and should find ways to become respectful partners in this Indigenous-based treaty and the responsibilities that it entails. Both the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee had long-established forms of governance, spirituality, and community that were directly disrupted by the arrival of settlers into this tract of land. ISSAN was formed in the wake of the discovery of the 215 children at a residential school in Kamloops, BC in 2021, and our intention as a group is to try and help the communities of Oxford with moving forward as active participants on the journey towards truth and reconciliation. We're a collaborative, nonprofit, grassroots network comprising of Indigenous, mixed heritage, and non-Indigenous allies. So ISSAN's goal is to help the communities of Oxford County to move forward on the path towards meaningful truth and reconciliation. Not only does ISSAN do its best to elevate the truths of our history and colonial interactions with Indigenous people, we're also trying our best to assist with the Oxford County Safe and Well Oxford Plan in order to ensure that Indigenous people also feel like they belong. I have heard it stated again and again that the number one thing residents of Oxford County wish is to feel that they belong. And if you've been paying attention to Indigenous voices, you would know that that is exactly what Indigenous people as a whole wish for as well, to belong and no longer be discriminated or persecuted for their race, practice, or status. On page 2 of the plan, it reads, communities where individuals and families feel safe, supported, and included, and where they can access what they need, when they need it, and to live fully. And that one of Oxford County's greatest strengths is the diverse range of multi-sector and multidisciplinary service providers, organizations, and agencies. However, there is a noticeable lack of Indigenous-based services, advocacy, education, and cultural opportunities for Indigenous people and allies within the county itself. This perpetuates a deep-rooted belief in people that it isn't safe to self-identify as Indigenous, that their voices won't be heard or counted, and also perpetuates an untrue concept that the thought of Indigenous people in history have no influence or part in Oxford County. Indigenous people who call Oxford County home are not able to say this without traveling to outside communities. So the plan goes on to state that 33% of the residents in Oxford County feel that their overall and mental health is only good, or maybe worse. Is this truly a wonder considering the lack of resources for truly marginalized communities like BIPOC and the 2S LGBTQIA communities? Only ISSAN exists within Oxford County for companies, social service agencies, and people to turn to in regards to Indigenous issues, and there are no easily accessible ways for Indigenous people to attend nearby community ceremonies or celebrations to participate in the reconnection process. Why is this the case when Oxford County has such a rich amount of Indigenous history that isn't widely known or promoted? Why are there no routes established with the bus companies within the county to help Indigenous people get to such things? This further perpetuates isolation and segregation of non-driving or low-income Indigenous peoples in our little urban towns seeking reconnection. Over the next few years and decades, Oxford County is expected to grow exponentially in population. And when you take into account that nationally 5% of any given area's population is Indigenous, this means that additional Indigenous constituents are likely to move into Oxford County as well. Based on these national stats and Oxford's population of 110,862 people, we can estimate statistically there will be approximately 5,543 people that are Indigenous already here, that are unrepresented in terms of local services, education, and cultural activities. That's over 5,000 people who are not represented or feel like they belong, right now. That could increase to over 7,000 if the county and the municipalities within do not do things to uplift, amplify, and validate Indigenous voices, history, cultures, and needs. Historically and even now, Indigenous people have been mistreated and ignored by government institutions who tried to claim ownership of these lands. Starting with the inaction regarding murdered and missing Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people, the implementation and support of the Indian residential school system, unethical land destruction such as what is currently occurring in the Ring of Fire in Northern Ontario, the lack of action to end water contamination in Indigenous reserves, the overburdening of foster care and prison systems with Indigenous people as a result of continued systemic attempts to, as it was put, kill the Indian. However, these attempts at mass genocide, while nearly successful, were not able to fully eradicate the resilient Indigenous people of Turtle Island. We are still here. The intersecting themes outlined in the Safe and Well Oxford Plan, mental health, affordable housing, substance misuse and addictions, equity, diversity, inclusion, are all issues that directly intersect with struggles that disproportionately affect Indigenous people nationwide and including within Oxford County. Given the current climate regarding truth and reconciliation, the ask put forth by UNDRIP, and the Pope's recent repudiation of the Doctrine of Discovery, it seems like the perfect time for local governments to be looking at how they can directly aid Indigenous people in their regions as a priority. This could be done by many ways, such as reevaluating local systems through an Indigenous perspective to ensure they are respectful of Indigenous culture, spiritual beliefs, family lifestyles, and establishing relationships with neighboring Indigenous nations. Host events in your community to raise awareness. Increase funding to mental health and addictions programs to create more capacity within these systems, establish a DEI committee, as well as addressing the municipal calls to action outlined in the TRC. However, I'm sure there are many other ways that local governments can think of in honor to honor truth as well as reconciliation. So what does ISSAN do? So we began as an Orange Hearts campaign as a creative display in downtown Ingersoll. My children and I hand cut out thousands of hearts to make sure that we were keeping an updated account of the children that were being recovered in 2021, and we were contacting local shopkeepers in Ingersoll and going in and putting up our displays every day as the numbers were coming out. This was a really big task for a single mom of 3, so I reached out to the community and we formed ISSAN, and we started planning marches. We began with our march in 2021, and then this year we're actually going to be hosting our 3rd annual March for Truth and Reconciliation on September 30th, which I think is a huge accomplishment. We've also established a red dress tree practice to honor special days and the loved ones stolen and lost by murdered and missing Indigenous women. This year, ISSAN was also successful in obtaining a grant from Communities Supporting Youth Futures Oxford to offer a new program in order to educate youth aged 6 to 16 about indigeneity, to help the next generation to know better and do better, while also addressing calls to action regarding education and about indigeneity. We call this program Indigeno and partnered with Big Brothers and Big Sisters. In April, ISSAN participated in Ingersoll's annual cleanup along the Thames as an act of responsible land stewardship. ISSAN also stood in solidarity with Oxford County Pride in Norwich to protest against their motion to ban the flying of any non-government flags, which would include the Pride flag, inclusive Pride flag in June, and flags regarding truth and reconciliation, such as the Every Child Matters flag in September. On May 6th this year in Tillsonburg, we hosted our first annual Honoring MMIW G2S Plus event. And just yesterday, the Indigenous Awareness Crosswalk was installed in Ingersoll, Ontario on King Street, crossing the historical Detroit Path. What a welcomed addition to this county for an Indigenous History Month to boot. Just makes it all the more meaningful. This was thanks to collaboration with Ingersoll's BIA. This month, we're busy with participating in local events as well as partnering with other organizations to highlight indigeneity, like on the 22nd, where we co-host a fry bread feast at Stitch Supper Club. Our next big goals are the development of a website, creation of adult basic education sessions, an Indigenous history trail, and a podcast to elevate local Indigenous voices and discuss broader issues that affect Indigenous people of Turtle Island. It's admittedly a lot of work, however 100% necessary. It took the shocking recovery of the 215 for the communities of Oxford County to do something about the atrocities and to become active participants in truth and reconciliation. For that, I do feel shame. I'm sure many of us do. However, I feel deep gratitude and pride that ISSAN has been able to do their best to lead by example and make truth and reconciliation a priority in Oxford County. I feel pride and gratitude also that as a council, you have all made it your priority to learn and observe some of the calls of action in the TRC by creating relations with Indigenous communities, sending the public school children to the COTTFN, Children's Powwow, and continuing with having me here today, and hopefully moving forward as well. I know that the information in the slides and in the documents that I sent is powerful and hard to digest. However, it leaves one with a lot to think about. I do wish to ask Zorra Town Council for your formal endorsement of ISSAN and the supports towards ISSAN's actions by means of promotion of our events and information on social media pages and your website. We also ask that Zorra Town Council table and present an annual report illustrating how the council has worked on addressing the municipal calls to action and the calls to justice outlined in the TRC report and MMIW final reports. We ask that you could graciously provide a community space once annually for ISSAN to host a community education event, and that these asks are made for the help of the community to move forward with being active participants in truth and reconciliation. My Uncle Blair, a 60s soup survivor from Mishkegowman First Nations, taught me a powerful phrase in Ojibwe when I began walking this path, and it stuck with me every step of the way, so I wish to leave it with you. Kina yivizimen maji, Minawagazman ambidash ga Minawagazyen. This means we came to be happy, so go be happy. There's no truer sentiment or phrase I've ever heard about the hopes for moving forward for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. So Chimigwech for having me today, and I hope that we can be grateful partners moving forward towards truth and reconciliation.
Thank you. Questions from council for the delegation? So, We're going to move on then, Patricia, to a report that's already on our agenda that is going to speak to many of the issues that you raised in your delegation today. So thank you again for your delegation, and we'll continue the conversations.
Miigwech for having me.
Miigwech. So we are going to move on then to item 8.6A, Report 2023-067 from the Legislative Coordinator Deputy Clerk regarding Zorra Land Acknowledgement updates. And Maggie, is there anything you want to highlight in that report before I ask Council for questions?
Nothing I would like to highlight, but I would pass it back to you if you'd like to discuss.
So I brought this up to staff that I owed Council an update on this because for a long time it was very hard to get any movement on these issues, these two resolutions that Council had passed. But I made some progress over the last few months, having met the chief of the Chippewas of the Thames, the Ogimakwe, and traveled down to their office and met with her, Patricia, and talked to her about these resolutions that our council had passed. And it was a fantastic meeting, very open. We agreed at that time that you know, that based on the research of staff here at Zorra and my personal experience, that the intention of a land acknowledgement is that there be a relationship between different groups of people, different communities, and that both of us agreed that we felt that between Chippewas of the Thames and Zorra Township, and I was also speaking on behalf of Oxford County at the same time, that the relationship was more important to us than us doing a land acknowledgement. So, that being said, we then walked over to their school, Antler River Elementary School, which is on the same property, just around behind the building. We walked over there, talked to the principal. They are having a children's powwow, which they do every year, and they very graciously invited the children from A.J. Baker School to attend. It is open to others. I know Patricia and her family are going to be attending. So instead of the powwow that the A.J. Baker students asked to be hosted in Zorra, they're going to be traveling by bus for that day to Antler River Elementary School and participating in that powwow. And then Jacqueline also talked about the possibility of future joint council meetings where there would be an invitation for Zorra and or Oxford councils to go down and join them. They have joint council meetings as well with, so there's Chippewas of the Thames, there's I think 3 other nations in close proximity, and they sometimes have joint meetings. She suggested that would be another good relationship building exercise. So I think to me, not specifically the land acknowledgement that council envisioned at the time, but if the intention of this is to actually learn things, understand things, and have relationships, I would suggest that what's happened is significantly better than a land acknowledgement where we don't actually know what we're talking about, and not the powwow that the students asked for, but I would argue, again, even better, they get to go to that community and participate in those students' powwow that they have on an annual basis and their whole community participates in. So for me, when I think about the whole point of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the calls to action, if the intention is better understanding of each other's communities, I think this is delivering actually better than what we set out to do in the first place, even if it is not the letter of what we set out to do. So I guess at that point, I'll turn it over to questions from council and I'll stop my talking. I have one question then for staff. One of the resolutions that we passed was that Zorra Township Council undertake a review of the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action directed at municipal government and devise a Zorra-specific list of action items before the end of 2022. So that time has passed, but I'm wondering if we have any work going on that Zorra-specific list of actions, regardless of the
time. I'm not aware of that. I think Alicia may have been working on that before she left, but I can reach out to her as well and see if she has any info on that.
Okay. I think we heard in the delegation today and asked for that, and I don't think this council needs to ask for it specifically in response to that because I think we have a standing resolution asking for it. So, yeah, I think it'd be good to get an update on that. regardless of what the, I would suggest that at the first stage might be just an identification of what are the calls of action that are potentially relevant. I mean, it might be the first step, but anything else on this report? Then I have a motion here somewhere. There it is. Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Stewart, that report 2023-067 from the Legislative Coordinator Deputy Clerk be received and filed for information purposes only. Any discussion? Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, just to mention from my not having the prior background of maybe what was discussed during the other resolutions there, other motions, that I think this is in line with what was being asked for during the delegation as well, is to start in the right direction, not a one-time thing, but build on what we need to do to be successful in having a good relationship. So it makes sense to me.
Anyone else? Councillor Mitchell.
I see some relationship between our earlier discussion about declaring emergencies and recently there was an excellent interview with Steve Bacon on the agenda with, I believe his name's Clifford Cardinal, who's a native indigenous entertainer who does a presentation on land acknowledgements and how they've been misused. I found that very interesting. So yeah, I agree with your comments that to just do an acknowledgement because it makes us, to paraphrase you, it will make us feel a little better. Without doing the background work that goes behind it, is not something we should proceed with.
When I was meeting with the chief, I sort of broached the subject and said to her, I said, I feel like if we do the land acknowledgement without having any kind of mutual understanding, it'll be for us and not for the people that were supposedly, whose land we're supposedly acknowledging. I said, I think maybe the relationship here is maybe more important. This is why we were sitting in their council chambers, just like this, just chatting, and she just looked at me and sort of went, right, and I think it was it felt really good that I think as a council that we, as a community, that we had headed down a constructive path, right, to something that was actually meaningful as opposed to something that was, I mean, symbols have a place for sure. But I think, in my opinion, what a lot of organizations do where they do a land acknowledgement, and I always ask whenever I'm at an event where there is one, I always ask, so how did you come up with a land acknowledgement? Did you talk to the relevant nations? And I would say more than 90% of the time the answer is no. They didn't talk to anyone. And then I always sort of say, well then, who are you doing this for? Like who cares? Like what is this about, Certainly not what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was about, which is about truth and reconciliation, not standing up and saying a thing. So I think that what we have done here, I think, is heading us down a much more productive path for all of our residents than something that's purely symbolic and not meaningful. Anything else before I call the question? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And then, excuse me, we have calendar and bylaws. So community calendar, what have we got here? Where are we at? 7th. So Chelmsford Lions on Saturday are having their Lions breakfast that the entire community is invited to. Should be an interesting one. It's the first one they're going to do. We'll see what's going to happen with that, but very exciting, I think.
June 13th, Marcus.
Sorry?
Excuse me. June 13th, we have a public meeting for the construction projects, 7 o'clock here at the
Right.
council chambers.
Thank you. I will not be able to attend that. I have a meeting at the county. Maybe I will. Can you send a notification, just an email or something out?
Sure.
To council on that? Yep. So that's for the two projects, right?
3 projects.
3 projects?
Road 64 paving, Beachville paving,
Yeah.
and Road 98 paving.
Okay. Embro Legion brunch, I think, is this Sunday. I have it in my calendar that it is anyway. AJ Baker's having their fun fair on the 15th and is going to have the official opening of the playground that was partially funded by the township that evening. That's open to the whole community if anybody wants to attend. I'm not sure if all of council was invited to that or not. You're going? Good. Oxford Pride Family Day on the 17th. I would remind you of the Warden's Challenge to everybody, every elected official to attend at some point during the day. And I think that's all I'm seeing until we're back here on the 21st, unless I'm missing something. Paul?
I have four items. One, this is Local Food Week.
Yeah.
And I checked the Oxford County map, and there are 14 retailers in Zorra Township. Where you
The
can go
most
and
of any rural municipality in the county.
Is it?
It is.
Yay. Okay. So I would encourage anybody to buy local, buy fresh, get your milk.
Your chocolate milk. At the Gold Speed Dairy.
Couple of HACA items. They're hosting a dance this Saturday, June the 10th, 8 o'clock, and it's Cracker Jack Palace, which plays good golden oldies music, so something for my generation, at 8 o'clock. And their monthly meeting is next Monday, June the 12th. And the Upper Thames next meeting is a week early. There's a conflict with something provincially going on. It's Tuesday, June the 20th.
Okay. And Maggie, you had your hand up?
Yes, there is the Zorra Multi-Use Courts Committee, Tuesday the 13th at 7, as well as the Cultural Mapping Task Force is Thursday the 15th at 7.
Thank you. Anybody else? Steph?
Embro Ag Society is doing their Progressive Farm Safety Day this Friday at Tunsford Public School. The Tunsford Pool is participating as well.
Thanks. Anything else? I think that's it then for items of community interest. So, bylaws confirmatory and done. Moved by Stewart, excuse me, moved by Stewart, seconded by Mitchell, that bylaws 32-23, 33-23, and 34-23 be taken as read a first, second, and third time and finally passed, and further that the mayor and clerk are hereby authorized to sign. Oh. This still isn't wrong. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And further that the mayor and clerk are hereby authorized to sign the same and affix the corporate seal thereto. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thank you, though. I would have forgotten it. And moved by Stewart, seconded by Mitchell, that this council move into meeting closed session at, what do we got, 12:18. Pursuant to section 239.2B, personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Maggie, can you let us know when we're off audio and video? Thank you. And back from closed, moved by Stewart and seconded by Mitchell, that bylaw 35-23, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council held June 7th, 2023, be read a first, second, and third time this June 7th, 2023, and further that the mayor and clerk are hereby authorized to sign the same and affix the corporate seal thereto. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And moved by Stewart, seconded by Mitchell, that this session of council be now adjourned and herewith closed at 12:24 p.m. and the next meeting of council be called for the June 21st, 2023 at 6 p.m. in the council chambers of the Township Municipal Office. Any discussion?